90% of players that get drafted number 1 overall in the NFL go on to have successful careers? And I don't mean successful like they started game. No. Being perennial Pro Bowlers, multi-time All-Pros, and in some cases Hall of Famers. That's what I mean by successful. But then there's that other 10% of players. The 10% of kids who get picked first overall and fail. They are the cautionary tales of the NFL draft. The guys like Jamarcus Russell and Ryan Leaf. And I'm afraid that Bryce Young may fall into this 10% if he keeps going down the path that he's currently on. Bryce has slowly become the most controversial player in the league. Everyone has formed an opinion on him. Some people label him a bust, while others excuse his poor play due to lack of weapons. But the question really becomes, has his team set him up for success? And if so, is he performing well? And if not, is he elevating his team or is he crumbling alongside them? Well, those are the questions that I plan to answer for you today. For those of you that don't know, this is Bryce Young. He grew up in California playing football at Mater Dei High School. At the same time, however, there was another kid playing football named CJ Stroud who also happened to live in California. Stroud and Bryce have been friends since all the way back in high school, even being on the same Elite 11 team. On that team, they had to compete against each other for the starting quarterback spot, and in the end, Stroud won. After they both got drafted, Stroud said that it was a blessing just to know that we're from the same area. We, referring to Bryce and CJ, grew up knowing each other and our parents knowing each other. It's a blessing to have a brother like that, to go through the same type of struggle and the same type of pressure and things like that. Clearly, these two are very close and will more than likely become rivals in the NFL until they retire. They even got a chance to play against each other this season. More on that later. After breaking almost every record at Mater Dei, Bryce became the number 3 overall ranked prospect in the nation, earning him recognition from schools like Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Texas Tech, and USC. Now initially, Bryce had chosen to attend USC because they were his hometown team. Growing up in California, he was watching their games. But as we all know, he eventually flipped his commitment in favor of Alabama after he went on an official visit in 2019. I wonder what made him change his mind. Before I continue, I wanted to ask if you guys knew that when you click the subscribe button, it does a cool little animation. Try it out, trust me. Bryce started his Alabama career as a backup to Mac Jones. Yes, this Mac Jones. The same Mac Jones who was named to the Pro Bowl as a rookie, won the national championship, and is now currently being benched for Bailey Zappi. What a fall from grace from him, eh? Mac only started 1 season in his collegiate career, and then declared for the NFL draft, paving the way for then backup Bryce Young to get the starting job in 2021. After taking his first snap, he never really looked back. Kinda. He did win the Heisman and AP Player of the Year, but of course he had his faults. Throwing a crucial pick 6 against Georgia to end their playoff run, and also never winning a national championship as a starter, unlike his predecessors Tua and McCorkle. Even after all these awards he received and records he broke, he was still under constant criticism from the media, hailing him as the next quarterback to fool the NFL because he was surrounded by the best talent in the nation, deeming him too small to be an NFL quarterback and too short to see over the offensive line. Social media and the NFL have gone hand in hand for the past 10 years almost, and every year we start talking about these players worse and worse, and all it does is hurt them. Social media has ruined the way we discuss the NFL. Everything is about clicks and narratives. We completely forget how good of a player Bryce Young is, and we choose to base our judgment solely on his height and weight. Same goes for his friend CJ Stroud. Shortly before being drafted, it came out that Stroud scored low on a cognition exam, and it gave the media a crazy idea to label Stroud as too dumb to play quarterback. These NFL analysts like Stephen A. and Skip Bayless don't realize the power that their words hold, which is why Bryce faced such a large amount of criticism from fans and the media throughout his college career. It only puts more unnecessary pressure on them and could lead to their careers ending without being given a fair shot, which is what's currently happening to Bryce. The hype leading up to the 2023 draft was massive, and there was a lot of talk regarding the number 1 overall pick. Not about the player being selected, but about what team would be using it. At the time, the Chicago Bears owned the number 1 pick, but they had just drafted Justin Fields not too long ago, so they were likely going to trade down. The Panthers have been in need of a quarterback ever since Cam Newton left, so it was a match made in heaven. The Panthers traded the 2023 first-round pick, 2024 first-round pick, and wide receiver DJ Moore in order to earn the rights to draft their future quarterback. Now I say future quarterback and not Bryce Young specifically because at the time the Panthers were not sure who they wanted to select. There was drama in the front office. The team's owner David Tepper had his heart set on drafting Bryce Young, but the head coach that they had just signed wanted CJ Stroud. There were many arguments within the organization until ultimately Tepper overruled the coach and drafted Bryce. Reich was brought into the Panthers organization just 3 months before the draft in January. The organization believed that Reich was the correct choice because he has a history of being an offensive mastermind, helping the Eagles win a Super Bowl and then helping the Colts make the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. They were hoping that his history of success would translate to Carolina, and that he could help develop whatever quarterback they selected in the draft. But as I said, he and the owner, David Tepper, had a falling out over what quarterback they should select. And as you would expect, it was the beginning of the end for Reich in Carolina. More on that later, and more on the owner David Tepper, who has been labeled as the worst in the league. Entering April 2023, Bryce was viewed as the consensus #1 overall draft pick by most people. There of course were a few doubters who were still claiming he was too small to play the position. But that's the same thing they said about Devontae Smith and Kyler Murray, and I mean look how those two are doing. They're both perennial Pro Bowlers and the best at their position. The other main criticism of Bryce is the same criticism that most quarterbacks coming out of top schools face. This idea that these quarterbacks aren't actually as good as their stats say simply because they were surrounded by the best talent in the nation, that they're being carried by the players around them and not the other way around. Sadly for Bryce Young, he was never given a chance to succeed. As I already said, the Panthers did not originally have the first overall pick in 2023 draft. They had to essentially trade for him. One of the picks that they traded away would go on to become the first overall pick in 2024 because of how bad of a season the Panthers had. But since they traded it away, the pick now belonged to the Chicago Bears. So not only did the team mortgage their future picks in order to select Bryce, they also did not give him a fighting chance during the season. I must reiterate that a team drafting first overall is never going to be a place that a quarterback can come in and just become incredibly successful without any help from his GM. The difference between the Texans and the Panthers drafting: when the Texans drafted CJ Stroud, they also drafted him a receiver in Tank Dell. They also went out in free agency and signed Devin Singletary and Dalton Schultz to help him. The Panthers, however, they went out and signed a 33-year-old Adam Thielen and an injury-riddled DJ Chark. There's levels to this, and one of these teams is clearly more dysfunctional than the other. The front office's inability to surround Bryce with good players became glaringly obvious the moment Bryce stepped onto the field. The front office was lured in by Bryce's ability to make off-script plays and elevate his team, and thought he could somehow lead this XFL level roster into playoff contention without any notable changes. Not even mentioning the plethora of injuries on both sides of the ball, notably along the offensive line, resulting in Bryce taking 11 sacks in 3 games. Only 3 games! Bryce's rookie season was very bad, to say the least. Let's start with the aforementioned game between the two best friends, Bryce and CJ. At the time, the Panthers were 0-6 and the Texans were 3-3. It was a big game for both teams and of course the two quarterbacks. In this game, Bryce actually outperformed CJ by over double the stats. Bryce had 235 and 1 touchdown, and CJ only had 140 and no touchdowns. It wasn't a great game by either quarterbacks, but sadly it was the lone bright spot in Bryce's rookie year, as the team would go on to finish the regular season with only 2 victories. The other one coming in a game against the Falcons in a thrilling 9-7 game, where Bryce had no touchdowns and the two quarterbacks combined for 300 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. I once again asked the question, is Bryce Young a good quarterback? Based off of his college accolades, I would say, yeah, you have to be a good quarterback to play for Alabama, and you definitely have to be a good quarterback to win a Heisman Award. I mean, the Heisman Award is given to the best player in the nation, so he clearly must have been the best player in the nation. If you agree with that, then you must also agree that it makes no sense that a player of Bryce's ability should ever have had as bad of a season as he did. 2,783 yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and a 33.4 quarterback rating as of week 17. All of which are bottom 10 in the NFL or worse, which would sway my thoughts into believing that he might actually be a pretty bad quarterback, or at least that's what his stats lead me to believe. But again, I do not believe this to be true. How could a Heisman winner, #1 overall pick, have such a bad season? Well, I believe it all stems from their owner, David Tepper. As previously mentioned, Tepper and Reich got into a disagreement on who they should draft. This resulted in Reich being fired after the team began the season 1-10. I believe Reich was the scapegoat for Tepper to simply say that the head coach was the problem and that there was nothing to worry about now. But the thing is, the problem actually stems from higher up in the front office than just the head coach. I believe that the root of all bad things going on in Carolina is from Tepper himself. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. The man is a notoriously bad owner. From throwing drinks on his own fans to just being a straight up asshole. There have been multiple 15-minute videos made about just how bad of an owner he is. One of them was even made by his former player, Cam Newton. Link in the description if you want to watch that after this one. In general, Tepper is an incredibly hands-on owner, basically the NFL equivalent to a control freak. If something is not done the way he wants it to be done, then someone is going to get fired. And as mentioned, that's exactly what happened. Reich had a vast history of success in the NFL and was fired after the team's poor start. The excuse Tepper gave was that the team was playing poorly, but the real underlying reason was that Tepper and Reich wanted to draft different quarterbacks, and Tepper could not stand having someone on the staff that disagreed with him. Along with Tepper, GM Scott Fitterer has also done a horrendous job curating a roster to help Bryce Young. But hey, since the Panthers have the worst record in the NFL, that means they have the #1 pick, right? Right? Well, remember how I said that their 2024 pick actually belonged to the Bears? Yeah. Not only did Fitterer trade away the team's future, he also traded away their present best player in DJ Moore, and before that let their best defensive player Hassan Reddick walk to Philadelphia, and will probably do the same thing to Brian Burns and JC Horn when their contracts are up. Now yes, Bryce Young has not been playing at an otherworldly level. He's not been playing at the same level we saw at Alabama, but it's not entirely his fault. The kid is literally not being given a fighting chance. At least teams like the Texans, who selected CJ Stroud right after the Panthers took Bryce, gave him a chance to succeed by drafting him a receiver in Tank Dell and adding pieces in free agency like I mentioned with Singletary and Schultz. Bryce Young's best ability is his accuracy and ability to extend plays. The Panthers, knowing this, decided it was best to not make any notable additions on the offense to try and get the best out of their quarterback. Like I said, they thought he could lead an XFL team to the playoffs. The Carolina Panthers are a dysfunctional franchise that needs to be eradicated from the NFL from top to bottom, excluding the players. I thoroughly believe that Bryce Young is cursed, the same way that the Browns are. He will never be allowed to succeed for as long as he's a member of the Carolina Panthers, or at the bare minimum for as long as David Tepper is the owner of that franchise. As for the two questions I opened the video with, no, the Carolina Panthers have not done a good job providing Bryce with a competent supporting cast. But at the same time, Bryce has not elevated the team. The great NFL quarterbacks like Brady, Mahomes, and Manning were always able to win games regardless of if the team was good on paper or not. Bryce Young simply folded alongside of his bad team. But I don't believe Bryce has been given a sufficient amount of time to be labeled as a bust. But I also think that he needs to improve a lot as a player. I know it's cliche, but him only being 5'10" really is a detriment to his abilities. I don't mean to sound like a hater, but he does have a lot to work through during his career, and I hope that the Panthers do not give up on him the same way that most of the media already has. Now, if you want to hear the story about his best friend CJ Stroud, click on the video right here on the screen and it'll take you right to that video.